today, but we'll see how it goes. I'm gonna let go. It's one of my stories, and it's called The Front Porch. The beep, 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 beep that Estelle heard on the other end of the phone told her that her daughter Kelly was too busy, again, to talk to her. It seemed like the word busy was something that she wished would just disappear. She didn't like that word anymore because everybody was always so busy. She was standing looking out the front window through the sheer curtains when a neighbor went zooming by in his SUV, and she realized she didn't even know his name. There was a whole new neighborhood and everybody was always gone. She put the phone back on the receiver and on the little table that was by the window, and she shuffled over to the door. And when she opened it, she was greeted by the two aspens that were just on the side of the porch. Their leaves were quivering in the wind, and she just loved the sound that they made. And she thought, at least the leaves have time for me. They're waving. She stepped down onto the porch and heard. She held her breath for just a minute or two to make sure that the place wasn't just going to crumble out from under her. It was starting to go. There were termites and, carpenter ants, and the boards were getting a little shaky. She looked down the street that was lined with more aspens at the 50s style houses. Hers was an old Victorian with a front porch, but these didn't have a front porch. The young people who had moved into the neighborhood built decks in the back for privacy, they said. As far as Estelle was concerned, they didn't know what they were missing. As she stood there on her front porch, her memories started to flood in, and she could see her children playing there on the floor, or on the old boards, their toys scattered everywhere. Kelly and John Jr., they were always so busy. But she could imagine them here. They had families of their own now, and they worked full time. They had computers and cell phones and a voice message that said, "We're away from the phone right now. Leave a message and we'll call right back." But they hardly ever did. She saw at one end the swing, the porch swing, with her and her husband John sitting there, and on the other end another porch swing with Cora and Leo. And then tears started to roll down her face because John had passed away 12 years ago, and Leo right after him. Cora's son put her in a nursing home, 60 miles away. Too far for a 85-year-old woman to navigate on her own. It was so lonely. The neighborhood had changed over, and when the busy people moved in, she just kind of got tired, and there was nobody ever around to give her any help. She stood there remembering all the things that had happened on that front porch. The birthdays, the fireworks. She and John and Cora and Leo would sit out there talking and telling stories till past midnight sometimes. You okay? There were bridal bouquets and baby bottles. and diapers and parties. She remembered how John in the spring would bring out the tables and the carts and help her bring out her houseplants to set them all around for everyone to enjoy. And then he'd get up on his little step ladder and put fresh paint on the welcome sign that was over the door in 3 colors to match the trim on the old Victorian. Oh, those were the days. But after John had passed away, she tried to keep things up, but it was just too hard. And she was remembering that last Halloween she heard some children who came by for trick-or-treat, and they were telling a story about an old witch who lived in a haunted house. And they were pointing at the old Victorian. True, the paint was fading and peeling, and once upon a time she might have laughed it off, but now she just couldn't see the humor. All of a sudden, Estelle stomped her foot. She said, "Enough, enough!" She turned and went back in the house. She shuffled down the dark hallway to the kitchen. She went to the corner where the cookie jar stood, brushed off the dust, and reached in. She remembered that cookie jar full of chocolate chip cookies and oatmeal cookies, and the way that John made lemonade to pass around to everyone, and she put all her cookies on a crystal plate whenever anybody would come by. But now, when she reached in, she pulled out a wad of cash. She and John were throwing dollars in there for years, any little spare change that they had, because they were saving for their 50th wedding anniversary trip to Hawaii. But John passed away just 2 weeks before they were to board the plane. She took all the cash and laid it out on the kitchen table and began to count. $1,200. That should be enough, she said. She shuffled back down the hallway to the telephone stand, dug out the phone book, and when she found what she was looking for, she punched the numbers into the phone and waited until she heard, "Tiedemeyer Construction, can I help you?" The young man, Ed Tiedemeyer, who showed up to give her the estimate for repairing the porch, was nice enough. But Estelle got a little bit annoyed when he started telling her about how hard it would be to repair, and it's really gone downhill, and I don't know what we're going to be able to do. And she started talking his ear off, telling him, well, you know, if John were around, he'd certainly be able to figure out something to do, and, well, John used to do this, and John used to do that, and telling Mr. Tiedemeyer stories that he was probably too busy to hear. But still, she went on and told him about the cookies on the crystal plate and how they were still warm when she passed them around, and how John squeezed the lemons himself to make the lemonade, and how delicious it was. And when she was done, Ed Tiedemeyer couldn't help but say, well, all right, I'll see what I can do, but it's going to cost you a pretty penny. Thousands, I'm thinking. And Estelle pulled $600 of cold, hard cash out of her pocket and shoved it toward Mr. Tiedemeyer, and she said, this will be your down payment. I'll give you the other half when it's finished. John would have been so proud of her. And Ed Tiedemeyer scratched his head and realized that this woman didn't have a clue about how much it was going to cost to redo her porch. So he just tipped his baseball cap and said, "I'll be in touch." Well, wouldn't you know that a month later, there were 4 men banging and clanging and hustling about with planks and hammers and nails. They were tearing apart the porch, and Estelle's spirits just rose, and she had a burst of energy like she hadn't had for the last 12 years. It was so nice to hear voices around the house again, around the front porch, even if it was being torn apart. And she was hearing these young men telling stories and sharing jokes, and she didn't even mind the cussing. She went shuffling down that dark hallway back into the kitchen, and she went up to a cupboard and pulled down the glass pitcher, cleaned out 12 years of dust, and started squeezing lemons. And then she was pulling out bowls and pans and flour and butter and sugar, and before you know it, warm cookies were coming out of the oven, and she laid them out on the cut crystal plate. She took them out to the young men. "Oh, these are so good. Did you make these? They're still warm. I haven't had a homemade cookie since I was this big." And each of them had a glass of lemonade that they just sucked right down. Things were starting to feel normal again for Estelle. Weeks later, the front porch was starting to look just the way it had when she and John made memories with it. The old boards were gone, the boards that had soaked up so many joyful tears and sad tears, but these new oak boards, I think they'll do. And there were new railings and new posts that looked just like the old ones, and fresh paint in 3 colors to match the trim of the Victorian. And somebody had freshened up the welcome sign. A little while later, a few weeks more, when that porch was finished, Estelle stood in front with Mr. Teetermeyer. Beautiful. Over and over again. Beautiful. Oh, beautiful. That's all she could say. She had her front porch back, and Mr. Teetermeyer thought he felt a little bit of tears forming in the corner of his eyes. Estelle pulled out $600 and handed it to Ed Teetermeyer with a glass of lemonade. He drank it down, choking back more tears, and he pulled out a receipt that he had written at home, and it had all the supplies and all the labor hours and everything that it had taken to get that front porch back the way that it was. And it said, "Paid in full." And he handed it to Estelle. Who knows what other surprises were about to happen for Mr. Teetermeyer and Estelle. And that's my story of the front porch.